Hey, what's up, everybody? I want to go over really quickly about leeches in Anki, as well as accepting ambiguity. This video was originally going to be about leeches, but then I realized a lot of the concepts are kind of similar, so I'm going to touch on both of them a little bit. Now, what are leeches? Leeches are a feature inside Anki that basically allows the program to tag, suspend, or delete any cards that you're having problems with. So cards that you get wrong a certain amount of times in a row. I'll go into more detail about that in the end. I'll also go over how to where to set your leeches and kind of how to check on the information that you need, but we'll do that at the end. I want to focus the beginning of this video on mostly just accepting ambiguity and why leeches are so important. So when I first started doing Refold, I kind of had this completionist mindset, and I did not let leeches leech. Now, I'm very happy to let leeches leech because after getting some experience, I realized how important it actually is. It seems like such a little decision to make. Oh, I'll just keep cramming them, but it's actually a really big deal. And we're going to go over why I think you will have a much better time in the SRS, as well as make quicker progress, even though that may seem counterintuitive, if you allow leeches to leech. So I'm also going to go over, like I said, some ideas on accepting ambiguity. Now, before we get started, I just want to say I'm putting this together in one take. It's going to be kind of rambly and all over the place. Hopefully you guys can follow the points that I'm making, but I didn't really have time to make a really nice polished video. And also, I think this will give us a chance to maybe kind of make a better video in the future, because I'll be able to get some feedback on this and find out where people are still kind of confused about this concept. So let's get started. So accepting ambiguity and leeches, why are they important? Well, the whole point of these two concepts is because you want to constantly be searching for low-hanging fruit. Also, I am not an artist, so I apologize ahead of time. My stick figures don't even look like stick figures, so this is going to be bad. But you want to focus on low-hanging fruit. Okay, now what do we mean by that? You know, if you're going apple picking or whatever, there's going to be all sorts of fruit in the tree. There are going to be the low ones up here, and there's going to be the high ones up there. The whole point is to be able to just grab up and get the new concept, the new vocabulary, the new whatever. You don't want to be getting your ladder or climbing the tree or jumping up here, because in the time that it took you to get this piece up here, you could have gotten 5 apples down here. So we want to let things go that we don't understand quickly. This is accepting ambiguity. We want to, if we're in our immersion and there's, a 5-word sentence or whatever, and we kind of understand these, but we just can't understand what this phrase means. It's like, oh, I know all these words, or I know most of these words, or maybe even I only don't know this word, but for some reason, even after I look it up in the dictionary, I can't understand it. Well, we want to just let that go then. We want to give it the good old college try, especially if we're in intensive immersion. In free flow immersion, you kind of let things go quicker, but in intensive immersion, you want to give it the old college try, look up a word, spend maybe a minute on that sentence or less, but as soon as you realize that it's kind of out of your reach, you want to move on, right? You want to go on to the next piece and look for that low-hanging fruit. You don't want to spend too much time on these apples up here. So why is this important also for leeches? Well, the same thing happens with leeches. Even though certain words are easy to understand, some words just won't stick. So you may understand it when you look it up, but for some reason that word just isn't sticking in the SRS. You've come across it a few times, but every single time you either get it wrong or you get it right a couple times in a row, but then when it gets to a certain interval, you get it wrong. Now, this can be due to all sorts of things. Maybe the concept is already close to a concept that you already know and you get them mixed up. Maybe the kanjis are easily mixed up. Maybe, you kind of feel like you know the word, but the context makes you blurry on it, so it doesn't quite stick properly. There's all sorts of reasons that this can happen, but basically anything that is out of your range, that doesn't stick somewhat easily, you want to just let it go. So just like you don't want to be mining words that you can't figure out quickly, you also don't want to be cramming a bunch of words in the SRS that don't stick relatively easily. And I'll show you later how to set up those leeches. And the reason for this is because you want to focus on low-hanging fruit because there's a snowball effect. There's basically a snowball effect in language learning that I've noticed, that the more you know of the language, the easier new pieces are to pick up. And especially once you get to like that comprehension level 4, comprehension level 5, the comprehension levels are laid out on the Refold website. Basically, once you're understanding, a good amount of your immersion, you start getting way more benefit from your immersion because you start picking up things from context. So it has this effect where it's like in the beginning, you only know a little bit. So you only have like so much, that you can attach to it. So, you can take this and attach it to new information. You can take this and attach it to new information. You can take it to this, attach it to old information, known information to make those memories easier to make. But you quickly run out of surface area on the knowledge that you know. But as you build up your base of knowledge larger and larger, you have more surface area to attach new memories to. So now you have more things that are in range, more things that are going to stick easier because you can fit way more things on the kind of outside the diameter, or not the circumference, the outside the face of your knowledge, if that makes sense. Because when you can relate information that you're trying to learn to information that you've already learned, it makes it much easier to learn. So you want to try and get this snowball effect going as quickly as possible. And the way that you do that, the way that you build up your snowball easier and easier, is not by climbing to the top of the mountain to collect the snow that's up there. It's by gathering all the snow that's down here. Right? Now, if you run out of snow that's down here, you climb up to the next area that there's snow. But there's going to be a lot of snow down here for you guys for a long time because there's so much of the language that you don't know, right? You won't have to start climbing the mountain and reaching for harder and harder snow till much later. I switched analogies on you, but I hope that makes sense. So that's kind of the whole reason behind accepting ambiguity and getting this snowball effect going. Now, another reason is this. Your brain benefits from lots of different contexts. As it sees these words in more and more kind of like new context, it's going to understand that that's important. Like, oh, this is something that I need to recognize, right? So the reason for this is, the reason that this is important, that your brain benefits from lots of different contexts, hundreds of contexts. Like, you really don't fully solidify a word. You may feel like you know a word, but you're not going to fully acquire most words till you've seen it hundreds of times. Now, some of those will happen quickly because they're very common, but others will take a very long time to fully solidify. So the main role of the SRS is to get, as Matt explains it, a dictionary entry started in your brain, right? So if this is your brain, if your brain is a dictionary, I don't know what's going on here. So if your brain is a dictionary, the whole point of the SRS is not to learn every single word, right? You don't learn words in the SRS. Basically what it does, if your brain is a dictionary, is it gets the dictionary entry started, right? It just kind of like puts the word in your brain, okay? It just makes you realize that it's something that you kind of know. And Matt explains this in his video, The Role of the SRS, and I'll link to that video down below. But immersion is what fills in the definition. This is what makes you understand it, right? So if you just have a dictionary entry, like the sentence that you mine it in will kind of help start the definition a little bit, and that's good. It'll give you kind of like one context to understand it, but even that one context won't be fully understood till you see it in that kind of same usage many times in many different situations, in many different sentences. So you got to get over this idea that the SRS is where you learn words. It's not. It's where you get dictionary entries started in your brain, and then you fill in the definitions. You fully solidify that in immersion. That's why immersion is so important. And the thing is, though, is that until you have the definition filled in, it's really not fully acquired. and it's from fully acquired words that your snowball gets bigger, right? So if you just have a bunch of kind of like barely learned words that you're attaching things onto, you're just kind of like piling not very well-known knowledge on top of other not well-known knowledge, and it's not going to stick as easily. It's through immersion that your snowball really gets solidified and bigger and allows you to attach way more information onto it. So that's why it's really important that you don't overemphasize the importance of the SRS. And like I said, and the way that we maximize the SRS effect and get the most dictionary entries going is by focusing on the ones that stick easily, and that's why we want to get rid of leeches. Let's see. So I went over the role of the SRS. And the last thing I kind of want to touch on is the idea of it's not wasted effort. Okay? This is something that I got hung up on at first. I wanted to complete everything because I needed to know if I mined it, then it was important. And if I let it leech, if I let it delete, well, that was just wasted time. That was wasted effort. But the thing is, though, is that you're going to be surprised at things that don't actually stick in the SRS, how often they actually accomplish their job of getting the dictionary entry started. There are words that I have leeched that I recognize in immersion, and I'm like, oh, wait, I know that word. What is it? I know that word. And now I'm doing a natural SRS in immersion still. Those words aren't gone completely. Now, there are some words that I have leeched that I don't recognize. And when I come across them, if I feel like, well, enough time has gone by, I'll re-add them into my SRS. So it's not like you're doomed to forget that word forever. It's just that you're postponing it till later, till your snowball is bigger, till you have more information to attach it to. You're constantly hunting for that low-hanging fruit, that that stuff that sticks easily, so you can grow your snowball, so that more things come into range. Because as you pick more apples, this is a bad analogy, but it's all I got right now. As you pick more apples, you can basically have a pile of apples that now you can stand on, and you have new apples that are in your range. And then you pick those apples, and now you can stand on top of those, and you have new apples that are in your range, right? So, it's the same thing as the snowball effect. As you pick that low-hanging fruit, more things come into range. So you want to focus on the things that allow you to pile that up quickly. So it's not wasted effort. You need to get that idea of it's wasted effort out of your mind, because actually stuff that leeches, stuff that you delete, stuff that you get rid of out of the SRS still have benefited you and will still cause a lot of those words to trigger as known and start to bring attention to them. And when something is brought to your attention in the SRS and you become curious about it, that's where the most learning is done. I remember at one point, from an add-on that I was using, my SRS or my Anki deck got so messed up that I decided just to start over. This is not something I recommend. I should have just tried to fix it. But I was so frustrated that I just started over completely. Okay? At the time, I had about 5,000 cards. At this point, I only have 4,000 cards because I have a bunch of leeches. So I'm still not caught up to where I was. I still notice cards from my first deck that was over a year and a half ago that trigger in immersion for me. And I'm like, oh man, that was a card from my old deck. I recognize that. So there's still words. So it's still doing the job a year plus after removing those cards from my active study. It's still got that dictionary entry started. And that's basically it. So sorry for the rambling, but I really think that this is an important point, and it's probably the biggest, I always talk about this, it's probably one of the biggest mistakes that I made early on, is not letting things leech. Because if you don't let things leech, basically what happens is, instead of, this card and then this card getting it right and then it moving forward and then it moving forward, basically what you have is you have your cards, you get it wrong, it stays in the same place, then you add more cards, it stays in the same place, and then you add more cards and then it stays in the same place. And basically what happens is you end up having a big chunk. There was a point when I didn't leech cards where I had 90% of my deck was at a 2-week or less interval. So almost all of my deck, I was just constantly cycling through because I didn't let those cards leech. And it caused it to be very frustrating. It made my SRS time go very long. And basically this cut into my immersion, which then made my SRS time take longer, because without the immersion to solidify those words and increase my snowball, it made these cards, the retention rate on these cards, go down. So even though I was actively studying them, I wasn't seeing them in immersion. I wasn't getting the proper immersion time with them that I needed to be able to make sure that they would eventually become learnable and acquired. So I hope that makes sense. It's a bad cycle to just not let things leech, because you're just going to get a big chunk of cards over time that just don't want to stick, that just aren't ready. And the thing is, those that no matter how much you brute force them, one or two may exit every now and then. But the mass chunk of these cards are not going to exit because they're just out of range. They're at the top of the tree, and until you actually acquire new cards, you're not going to reach up there, right? Now, that doesn't always work that way. Eventually, you will brute force them, but this is kind of how it works. So it's better to focus on the things that stick easily. Accept ambiguity, let things that you don't understand quickly go, and accept leeches, let things that leech go. So how can we leech things? Well, basically, if you go to options, groups, lapses, you set your leech threshold here. I have mine set to 6. I think Refold recommends 4. And I have it set to tag only, but I recommend doing suspend card. The only reason I like tag only is because I like to go through then, and I have leech cards. So I like to go through and actually look at my leech cards and go through them before I suspend them. I don't know why I like doing that. I just kind of like looking at them, but it's kind of a waste of time probably. Another piece of information is if you go to browse and you right click here and you go to lapses, then right here will show up how many lapses those cards have. I don't know why this one isn't suspended. It's at 13 lapses, but I'll have to look into that. But yeah, this should be suspended. But yeah, so that's kind of what you do. Set your lapses to, I wouldn't go too high. I wouldn't go above 6, 4, 5, 6, somewhere in that range is good. If you want to check your lapses, add lapses to your browser. What else? I feel like I'm missing something. And yeah. Oh, and then the only other thing that I'll go over is how do things lapse, because some people get confused about this. A lapse happens when a card exits learning. So basically, when you first learn a card, you go through these options. You go through these options. So I have my cards first show to me after 2 minutes and then 1 hour. And then when they lapse, they show it to me every hour. So if I get a card wrong in an hour, it will show it to me again. While it's in that loop of going through the lapse, of going through that hour, it does not count as a lapse. That is what's in learning mode, okay? So if you're in learning mode, it does not count towards lapses. So let's say this is a brand new card, right? I go in, it shows it to me at 2 minutes, I'm in learning mode. I get it wrong, nothing happens to the lapses. I get it wrong again, nothing happens to the lapses. I get it right, now it goes to 1 hour because I have my learning mode set to 2 minutes and 1 hour. I get it wrong, it goes back to 2 minutes. Nothing happens to the lapses. But I get it right in 2 minutes, I get it right in an hour. Now it's showing it to me tomorrow. Now it's in regular rotation. So it shows it to me tomorrow. I get it wrong tomorrow. It goes back into learning mode. Not this learning mode, but it goes back into my lapses learning mode. So now I see it every hour. But I get 1 added to my lapses because I got it wrong while it was out of learning mode. So now it's back in learning mode. In the next hour, it shows it to me. I get it wrong. Another hour later, I get it right. So now it shows it to me tomorrow. The next day, I get it wrong. It adds a lapse. So if it's in that learning mode, it does not accumulate lapses. But anytime you get it correct for the day, and a day goes by, and then you get it wrong again, it adds a lapse. I don't have to get it wrong in a row. If I get it correct next time and correct next time and correct next time, but then wrong, it will still add a lapse. And once the total lapses is equal to whatever you set your threshold to, that's when it will leech. And I think that that is the best way to handle it. So sorry, this ended up being much longer than I was expecting. But like I said, it's going to be an unpolished kind of video. But that's why I think lapses are so important.